Okay, so I'm just going to read through the usual notices. So, good morning everybody. I'd like to remind you all that this council meeting is being broadcast live over the internet, so we are all on camera. Please be aware you may be visible on screen when people around you are speaking, and please remember to speak clearly into your microphones. This meeting is available to view online now and in the future, whenever and wherever people wish to view it. Therefore, there is no need for any other filming of the meeting to take place. We welcome the use of Welsh language at meetings, but I have had no requests for people to speak Welsh today, so this meeting will be conducted in English only. I'd like to welcome everybody attending and anybody watching the meeting via the webcast, but can I ask that all mobile phones and other noisy devices be put onto silent. If there is an emergency alarm, please follow the green signs and go to the ground floor of the Civic Car Park. Finally, if we have any motions or amendments during the meeting, I will need them to be clear before we go to the vote. Okay. I'm going paperless today, which means now I need to open the other tab, which is proving more difficult than it should be. Anyway, if we move on to attendance first, while I sort that out. Do we have any apologies?
Yes, apologies for absence have been received from Councillors Giles Davis, Raymond Mills, Richard Overton and Cathy Evans.
Members, are there any other apologies you know of? No? In that case, then we'll move on to declarations of interest.
Thank you, Presiding Member. I've given advice to members in relation to declarations, and as members will be aware, the report covers all schools in Torfaen but provides more information in relation to 2 schools. So my advice to you is that you'll have a personal interest if you are a governor of either Cwmbran High School or Ysgol Gyfun Gwyn Lliw, or have a close personal association with someone who attends or works at the school. I've been made aware of the following interests. Councillor Connor O'Connell has a daughter who attends Ysgol Gyfun Gwyn Lliw. Councillor Fiona Cross has children who attend Ysgol Gyfun Gwyn Lliw. Councillor Kelly Preston has a nephew who attends Cwmbran High School and is a council-appointed governor at that school. Councillor Rose Seaborn is a governor at Cwmbran High School and has grandchildren attending Cwmbran High School and Ysgol Gyfun Gwyn Lliw. Councillor Mandy Owen is a council-appointed governor at Cwmbran High School, and Councillor David Daniels is a council-appointed governor at Cwmbran High School. If I could ask those members to confirm those interests.
Confirm.
Yes?
I have a niece at Cwmbran High School.
Okay, we note that, thank you. I have advised this as a personal interest on the basis that the recommendation in the report is to note the contents and members are not making any decisions and will not be proposing any actions in relation to those schools. Also, my advice is that you do not at this stage need to declare an interest in relation to any other school. However, if during the meeting you ask a question or discuss a particular school, then you should consider whether you have an interest to declare at that time. Thank you, Presiding Member.
Okay, thank you, members. If we move on then to item 4, support for schools and schools funding. I hand over to Dermot.
Thank you, Presiding Member. Good morning, members. The purpose of the report that you have is to look at where we are in terms of performance of our schools overall, detail the support provided to schools in difficulty, and obviously in particular to the 2 schools in special measures, Cwmbran High and Ysgol Gyfun Gwyn Lliw, to outline for you the key actions to support improvement in secondary schools over the coming year, and to address the concerns from the information reported in the media, in particular the Argus about alleged levels of school debt in Torfaen. I'm going to try and cover all of this quite briefly, and obviously you have a lot more detail in the report to allow time for questions at the end. So I hope the report has given members a fairly deep insight into how we are working with schools to do the best for our learners. The first part of the report deals with where we are in terms of some indicators of school performance. In brief, this shows there is an improving picture over time in primary schools, with a significant majority of our primary schools requiring low levels of support. The Strive for 95 campaign that we've discussed before around improving attendance has seen our primary schools' overall attendance improve significantly over the last year. And with very few exceptions, nearly all of our primary schools have improved their performance. The total number of days lost to exclusion and the actual number of exclusions has been dropping consistently over time in primary schools. The picture at secondary schools remains an area of concern, however, with the majority of schools requiring the highest levels of support. And when I say support, I mean obviously from the Education Achievement Service and from the local authority. Too many of our secondary schools have been in some form of ESTIN follow-up after their inspections, typically because of concerns around standards and outcomes for learners, and issues related to weaknesses in leadership. Development of leadership, development of leadership capability at all levels in secondary schools remains a priority for us and our colleagues in the EAS, and without high quality leadership and capacity in our secondary schools, we will not be able to achieve improved outcomes for learners. And obviously in the report we go on to talk in some detail about what we're doing around improving those outcomes over the coming year. Secondary attendance performance has overall stayed largely the same over the last year, although this does mask some improvement in some schools and a decline in others. In secondary schools, while the overall days lost to exclusion has dropped, the total number of exclusions has increased. This is due to increases in 3 schools, Abersacion, Cumbrian High School and Ysgol Include. The other 3 schools have reduced their incidence of exclusions. And some of the data is in the pack for you. So moving on to what we're doing to support schools, the report details in general terms the support to schools based on their categorisation. And again, in the appendices, I think we've put some detail about how schools are categorised currently, although there are some changes to that system that are coming through. For those schools who need the highest category of support, we meet with them on a monthly basis, and these meetings involve the head teacher, the chair of governors, myself, our head of pupil support, Sharon Davis, the exec member for education, the challenge advisor for the school, and often other senior colleagues from the EAS, in addition to other invited members of staff from school. So sometimes I should have introduced Debbie Hartfeld, who is the Managing Director of the EAS, the Education Achievement Service, who's with us today, sometimes comes to those meetings too. So we have a very clear structure in place to support schools in a monthly meeting, looking at the level of progress they're making and any barriers they may have. So these meetings focus very closely on schools' plans for improvement, the pace of progress the school is making or not, and how we as an LA, together with the EAS, can support the school. This process enables us both to know our schools very well at a detailed level and to provide appropriate support and challenge throughout the year. We don't wait to the end of the year until we get results. We are working with our schools every month to look at where they are and how we can support their trajectory in terms of their recovery. In a small number of cases overall, progress has not been at a pace and a level that has been acceptable. Where this has been the case, we have invoked the use of statutory powers, as detailed in the paper, and also outlined in the statutory guidance, which is readily available on the web, but we can put a copy in the members' room, called Schools Causing Concern. While we always try to avoid the use of these powers, in those cases where we have not seen sufficient and timely progress, we have used our powers consistently and in a timely fashion. By moving on to the 2 specific schools, Cumbrian High initially, members will see in the paper, in regard to Cumbrian High School, the local authorities had to invoke the use of statutory powers on a number of occasions. Most recently, the local authority has consulted with the governing body on the potential appointment of an interim executive board. And I should say an interim executive board is a very significant step. In terms of the statutory guidance, what that means is that should the local authority proceed to that step and the Minister approve it, the governing body would be dissolved and a panel basically of board members would be appointed by the local authority to take over the governance arrangements in the school. So that's a very significant step. As the executive member will shortly be asked to take a decision on whether or not the local authority should formally apply to the Welsh Government for permission to appoint an IEB, Trust members will understand we cannot discuss the details of that matter today because it's subject to a further decision. But I hope I've given you enough background in the paper to help you understand how we've got to this point and what that might mean. Should that decision be taken internally, and then should the Minister agree to that proposal, should it go forward. I do hope, however, the paper outlines the reasons for the local authority's concerns and the robust steps we have and are taking to address these. I won't go through the details of the support package then, because I think that's quite well laid out in the paper, I hope, for you. And obviously we can talk in some detail about any questions you have about that at the end of my introduction. In terms of Iskall Giving Green Clue, members will note that the local authority has considered the use of powers for this school. We always do for any school that goes into an Estin category. But we also consider use of powers where we've got detailed information through our work with colleagues in the ES and directly with schools if we feel there are grounds that are justifying the use of those powers. So in this instance, there was a very clear acceptance by the head teacher and her leadership team, together with the governing body, for the need for significant change. The leadership team in school are already taking significant steps to address the recommendations that Estin have made, and the school has now submitted its post-inspection action plan, and the local authority statement of action is finalised, and that will be with Estin shortly. I think it's due in just around the end of term. So our statement of action is in effect replicated in what you have today, and that's our statement of what we're going to do to support the school. We'll be meeting with the school, with the EAS and Estin, to review these plans early in the new term, and that's part of Estin's response to schools and special measures now, what they used to call an improvement conference, but now it's a meeting to look at the PEP, the Post-Inspection Action Plan, and the local authority statement of action. I think that takes place towards the end of September. And again, we've reproduced the details of the support being provided in the report for you. There's not a much longer section. There's another section looking at the wider support. So members, you've got a snapshot there of the wider offer for schools in terms of how we're going to promote professional learning, opportunities for school-to-school work, so how we can join schools up with some of the best practice happening throughout the region and sometimes beyond the region, peer review work, where schools come and support each other, and that work's being supported by Professor Mick Waters, and several of our schools are involved in that, as you'll see. Leading learning advisors work with schools as well. Work with Dr. Lynn Shout, who's a Canadian expert, I think, and is internationally renowned. So we're pleased that the EAS have been able to secure her support, and the enhanced support for school developing the school development plans. A key tool for all schools, and many of you who are governors will understand what I'm talking about. This is the key document where schools outline their objectives for the coming year, and in our case, over the coming 3 years. Because our schools' plans go over 3 years, and look to see how they really address all of their internal issues and some of the pressures that obviously all of our schools are working hard to face at the moment in terms of balancing budget, which I'll come on to, requirements, together with the introduction of the new curriculum and other changes around accountability and so on that are being introduced. So I hope that section gives you an appreciation of the scope and the reach of the support to our schools in general in the year ahead. So lastly, I'll turn to the issue of funding for schools, and specifically I was asked to respond to the reports in the media about the position of some of our secondary schools. Torvine's always maintained a position of low numbers of schools in financial deficit. So I think this results from a very careful financial management and early intervention process. We have for many years supported schools with their medium-term financial planning to ensure we can help them anticipate difficulties they face early on, before they become too great, so they can intervene in a timely way, take corrective action to avoid getting into the position of significant, and in some cases, and if you look at the appendices with the figures for the whole of Wales, you see some authority schools are in very significant deficit positions. Deficits looking, running up to I think 1.8 million in one instance in the region. So we take very timely action with our schools to support them to make the decisions they need to. So since 2007 to 2008, no more than 5 schools annually have reported a financial deficit. So as many of you will know, I think it was the article in the South Wales Argus commenting on schools' licence deficit arrangements. The article was not entirely accurate. It started with the somewhat misleading statement, with one school expecting debts of £671,000 within 3 years. What I would say there is that would be the worst case scenario, and I think it details this in the report, if the school did nothing and didn't take corrective action. The potential is the school could be in that position, but clearly that is not where we are going to be, as the school's already taking timely action and we're looking at a much lower figure in the licence deficit, which is detailed in the report for you, and we will not get to that position. Again, we were with most of our secondary colleagues this week looking at their SDPs, at the school development plans, and talking about where they are in terms of their budget position. And I am confident sat here today that the licence position that we have detailed for you in the report is accurate, and we are not seeing anything like the figure being presented in the Argus as being a likely outcome. So I'm just conscious that there's a lot of information in the report. I've tried to give you a very brief introduction and cover the main issues, but I'm also conscious there's probably lots of questions. So at this point, I'll stop at that point and suggest that questions might be appropriate.
Thank you. Members, questions and comments? Do I have anybody? Liz?
Thank you. Very much my comments really are in relation to 5.3, specific support to schools in special measures. Cumbraen High School, I know back in 2013, Torvine's Education Department was placed into special measures, and this list in 5.3 gives a breakdown of the situation with Cumbraen High School, and worryingly that goes back to, in this report, 2015, and looking from the outside world, this doesn't read particularly good. You have whole, months, if not years, of nothing being seen to be done, and then a month either after or before Estyn attended, there was, work being done. In the school's December 2015 inspection, the school was judged as requiring Estyn monitoring. Nothing then happened really other than until October 2016. It says the LA worked closely with the head teacher, but it took 10 months for anything to be done. And then it was 8 months after that Estyn concluded in June 2017 that the school had made insufficient progress, and was placed in the statutory category of significant improvement. In July, a month later, it was when the LA exercised the powers of intervention. And so it took, for me, it reads as though the Estyn planned visit was the catalyst for that. And then we're going on to 14 months later, September 2018, the local authority issued a new warning notice, and in the same month Estyn visited the school. Did we have notice that Estyn was coming, or did Estyn come before we issued that local authority warning? And then here we are, 2019, and the local authority has outlined concerns with the governing body. We are almost 4 years down the line, and we are still in a situation with Cumbraen High, and yet we have the EAS that we handed over some control to assist us with our education in 2013. So from 2013 we should have been having not only the local authority but an outside agency or body that we had brought in, and yet we are still seeing what are significant failures. And my concern is for the children of this borough, and particularly this school, because it seems to me that we're not even reaching for average, and that concerns me. I'd like some comments on that significant timeline, please, from 13 to where we are today.
Thanks for that. Obviously, the report starts from 2015 because the school, Cumbraen High, came into creation in that year. So we were asked to comment on that. But you're right in terms of there being concerns about the schools previous to that, who then combined into. And there's been an issue going right back to our Estyn inspection about Key Stage 4 outcomes in particular, so GCSE outcomes. What I would say is, this is a brief summary of the actions that I've taken, and we were asked to look at the specific support. So There's been a very detailed intervention process with the schools over a long period of time, and I'll ask Debbie to comment on some of that work in a second. But we have to work with the school. The local authority doesn't have direct powers of intervention that we can simply exercise unless we have a body of evidence. So we work through the school, we work with the head teacher and the chair of governors, the governing body, to try to bring about change. Where we get an evidence base, where we're not seeing that progress, and that's detailed in your report, the grounds of intervention we have, we then take statutory steps. This isn't the sum total of all of the things that we've done to try and affect change in Cumbrian High, but you can see from this list, we've used nearly every statutory power that we have to try to bring about that change. And I agree with you, the position where the school is at the moment isn't acceptable, which is why we're taking the step we are currently. But Debbie, do you want to just come in and talk about maybe some of the other support? Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah. Just picking up on the table that was provided in your report overleaf on 5.3, particularly around Cumbrian High. I echo everything Dermot has said. You can see actually that at the inception of Cumbrian High School, the school was part of the Welsh Government Schools Challenge Cymru programme, and that was the case up until March 2017. And the school was in receipt of a very nuanced level of support that was directed by Welsh Government. So at that point in time, both the EAS and actually the local authority had limited impact to the interventions that were happening in the school at that point in time. And then as we move forward from March 2017, with EAS had their own employed challenge advisor, you'll recognise that term of the people that work with the school. The levels of support, as you can see, are detailed then from academic year 17-18 and onwards, which is where we were able to make the decisions about the support that went into the school. You can see a summary just of the number of challenge advisor days that were placed into the school. And all of the evidence that the challenge advisor had at the point in time was being shared with the governing body, the executive member, through those monthly meetings. And a wide range of support has gone into the school over that period of time to support, but also to challenge the pace of progress, which hasn't been as accelerated as we would like, and therefore the outcomes, as you state, for learners has been too low, and unacceptably low in some cases.
As I said, I am concerned for the children that we are trying to educate. For me, this is going back to sort of 2012, 2013. We're now in 2019. At what point as a local authority do we say we are not doing enough? We have the local authority, we have EAS, we have all these ESTIN, we have the support days, 25 support days, clearly not enough in 18-19 because we wouldn't be where we are now. What I am suggesting really is that we haven't done enough because 6-7 years down the line we wouldn't be where we are if we had supported, and we have to take responsibility for that and not just continue to blame the governing body and the schools.
If I just pick up, if that's okay, on the levels of support. So the 25 days are just one part of the support. There are other days that are noted beneath the challenge advisor days, which actually sum up to quite a large total of days. In addition to that, the local authority have supported the school with mentors, and the levels of support going in, I believe, have been appropriate up at this point.
Right, can I just come in to add to that? I mean, there's a key point here about who can affect change within a school. And I think the way your question's phrased, Councillor Haynes, I just need to respond to. Council makes a massive investment in education. A significant proportion of the overall budget that you have available as members goes into schools. It doesn't sit in the local authority. The vast majority of our resource goes to schools, and the vast majority of that resource, and also the 50 million that comes in through the region from Welsh Government into schools across the region, not 50 million for us, but our proportion of that, goes to schools and pays for staff. So our critical resource, I'm not talking about blame now, but our critical resource is in schools. So the role of the local authority is to offer every possible support, to work with our governing bodies and our head teachers and the leadership teams in schools and middle leaders to get the best possible outcomes for those schools. But the local authority is a very small resource in terms of what we have available. We're not positioned to go into every classroom every day. That's why we've got our middle leaders, our senior leaders, our governing bodies working with schools. So we have to work through those structures. And there are rules of engagement, if you like, about what we can and cannot do. So we have to follow the process, but critical, which is why we've talked about leadership so much and support for development of leadership skills in our schools in the report. That is a critical component. We've got lots of fabulous leaders in our schools. We've got lots of excellent staff in both of the schools that we're talking about in particular as well, I need to say. But this isn't working as it is at the moment. And what we've outlined in the report is how we have used all of the tools available to us to affect change. Sometimes that's difficult, and clearly at the moment it's a bit of a difficult process we're going through, and obviously I can't talk about that in more detail. But I feel we are making as timely an intervention within what we're allowed to do to support the quality of leadership in our schools to affect change for children. But I think that's a really important point.
Okay, I'll bring in someone else and come back around, okay? So I've got Councillor Dave Thomas next.
Thanks, Chair. I've got two questions, if that's all right, just to ask initially. Has the local authority considered the acting head isn't quite experienced enough to take on the mammoth task that she has at the moment? And the second question I have is, do you not think that the local authority has to take some responsibility and not just blame the governors and Helen Coulson?
Obviously, I'm not going to talk about individuals today because that would be inappropriate. What I can say is that the governing body meeting in school earlier this week, I can't remember what day it was now, I think it was Tuesday, that there will be change, and I've been tasked by the governing body to look at securing an acting head teacher from September, from an experienced head teacher, and that process is well advanced. And I hope to go back to the governing body with news on that in the coming couple of days. And obviously what I would say is I'd give absolute praise to the acting head who's been there, who's done a sterling job in very difficult circumstances, and I think has poured herself into the role, and I just want to put on record my thanks for her hard work in taking the school, taking a leadership role in school during what has been a very difficult time. But the governing body, with the acting head, have come to that decision, and we're well advanced in taking that forward. In terms of taking responsibility, I think what I am saying is that there's a mutual responsibility here, and absolutely one of the things I'd want to be sitting here doing, as I've made clear before, is saying to you we've got really good performance in all of our schools. It's a mixed picture. As I've said, we've seen good progress in primary, and we have had a difficult time in secondary. I think what we're putting in place to support our secondary schools, because I'm not blaming anyone. I know the word blame has been used a couple of times, but I haven't used it. What I'm focusing in on is how do we get the best possible outcomes for every learner by supporting all of our governing bodies, all of our leadership colleagues in schools, and I think we're well placed to secure that improvement over time. But clearly, with other authorities in the region in similar positions, because we're not necessarily out of step. And if you look at the performance that Torvine's had over the last number of years, our relative position in the region actually hasn't changed. But that overall outcome still isn't good enough. So I think what we try to detail in the report is systematically how we're looking to support the quality of leadership in schools in general, but also how we're using the tools that we have at our disposal to lever change if that's required. Do you want to just come in there as well?
Just to pick up on one of the second point that you raised, it's incumbent upon the EAS also to ensure that we're providing the best level of service we can. I'm not sitting here saying that the performance in the schools is where it should be. It absolutely isn't. There's much more room for improvement. So that's why we continue to look for best practice. continue to make sure that we're able to offer the best possible service and support we can to head teachers across the region and to teaching staff. And we are held accountable, I believe, fully by Torfaen Council for the performance that the staff in the AS also provide to schools. So we're constantly trying to look to ways to improve. And you can see in the report it details some of the work we've done with Professor Mick Waters, where we asked him to undertake a review of the support we're offering to secondary schools, in case really we were missing something, in case there was something that would work, that would increase that pace of improvement that we weren't considering. And you can see through the report that you have, the work around peer reviews, the work around the use of mentors, and we continue to do that also with the commissioned work from Dr Lynn Sharrett. So trying to provide a full range of expertise into your schools, but completely appreciate there is a long journey to undertake also.
Yeah, thanks for that, Chair. Yeah, just to be clear, I wasn't doubting that the acting head hasn't poured herself into the role. I was just pointing out, I found it a little bit surprising that somebody with that lack of experience would have been appointed as deputy to a school that was in a difficult time as it was.
So just to come back on that, obviously the deputy head is the deputy head, and what happens in terms of the rules, so to speak, is the deputy head would be expected to act up for a period of time. So they weren't specifically appointed per se into that role. That was their role. But I take the point you're making, and I absolutely accept that there was no slight, obviously, on the deputy head, but obviously that situation has now moved on.
Okay, Councillor O'Connor.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Excuse me. I refer to the performances at Key Stage 3 on page 5 and Key Stage 4, page 6. They show a declining picture from 2016 to 18 at Key Stage 3 and from 2015 to 18 at Key Stage 4. This suggests to me that the support packages that we've put in place aren't particularly effective. I'm wondering if you could speak to why you think the support that we're able to offer has been ineffective, and what tools you think you need that you currently don't have that the authority could provide to address any gaps in the support. And as a final point, I'm aware that Councillor Haynes talked upon when the authority had delegated powers removed from it previously. How far away are we from that now?
Sorry, can I just ask for clarification on that last point? How far are we away from?
So previously, I think it was 2013, the authority had its delegated responsibility for delivering education, its powers removed from the authority, put into special measures. How far away are we from that position now?
Let me start there, and I'll try and work my way backwards. I think special powers in the new framework's actually been removed by Eston as a category. So if an authority gets in significant difficulty, there is a follow-up category, but the whole inspection regime is changed quite substantially. So technically there is no special powers, but there can be follow-up, and that would be it's not a similar system, but it would involve Welsh Government with Eston coming in to support the authority in terms of a recovery process. So that's how the new framework stands. Obviously, we work very closely with Welsh Government and with the Inspectorate, and part of the framework that now exists for follow-up for schools in difficulty, as I mentioned, we've got a meeting with the Inspectorate, with Eston, and the school with the EAS coming up in September. And it's much more of a collaborative, problem-solving, solution-focused environment that we're now in. I won't say why it's changed, but I think people have recognised that there are better ways of trying to get progress. Often for schools, and perhaps for authorities, but often for schools across Wales who maybe have been stuck for some considerable amount of time. So I think the Inspectorate are trying a very much different approach now to see how they can support in different ways. In terms of the table on page 6 in particular, what I draw members' attention to is it does show a decline in terms of overall outcomes at level 2+, which is obviously the old measure that disappears really now. In terms of 5, the key measure, of 5 good GCSEs, including English and Maths. I'm sorry for the jargon if it's not all clear. Obviously, over the period between 2015-16 and to 17-18 and today, the whole exam structure changed as well. So obviously some authorities went down by 15% in some instances in 2016-17. So we've, I'm not trying to justify this as being a positive picture because it needs to improve, and we've clearly seen authorities in the region improve like Newport, and we want to be emulating that and exceeding it. But I don't think there's a direct correlation between these figures and necessarily are we not doing everything that we should be, or have we not used our powers. As Debbie's already commented upon, we have an active review process internally within the local authority and with colleagues across the region and the EAS, where we look every year about what can we learn from what's gone well, what hasn't gone well. That's why we've commissioned research from Professor Waters, etc. And in terms of perhaps the statutory powers, if that's what you're looking at, the framework is the framework at the moment, but I'm aware that Welsh Government are likely to bring out a pilot in early in the new academic year, looking at how they can better support everyone within the system around schools causing concern, and that may lead to some change in the guidance. We've clearly asked to contribute to that, and we have been feeding back to Welsh Government on our experiences to date.
Me too.
Just a quick follow-up. Are you content that you have all the tools you need to address the problems at Cwmbran High? And is it something that would be improved through budgetary increases to that school?
Chief Market, be careful what I say. Do I want more money or not? I'm probably going to say yes to that. I'm actually going to say no to that. The issue here is about clarity of action and about ensuring that we've got joined up agreement with all parties about how we can best move forward. And that's all I can say on that. So the powers we have, we've clearly exercised and used. We've expressed to Welsh Government some of the frustrations we've experienced in the past about the timeliness and the evidence base that has to be there. We have to be fair to everyone, and the way the current system is structured, that takes time. So we have fed back on our thoughts on that to Welsh Government.
Stuart Evans next.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, can I say, Dermot, that I don't think no one in this room would disagree with your sentiments about the excellent staff that we have in place. And thank goodness we've got those excellent staff. And because of them, this may be far worse than what it is now. But what I would like to ask, we've been talking about the challenge advisor support that we have. We're talking about 125 days over the periods in the two schools. Do you think this is effective? And what cost implications have we arrived at by having these challenge advisors?
I start backwards, as it were, again. So the cost, I think we put in around 500k into
this
year. And we've seen a 2% reduction year on year, thereabouts, with ES over the last number of years. I remember back when Council agreed to collaborate with the other partners in the region, our initial contribution to the EAS was about 900,000, I seem to recall. So actually our contribution to the EAS in financial terms from the councils decreased significantly over time. And that's because of good leadership within the EAS, and I would say strong leadership as well from JEG, the Joint Executive Group, with the company board, to make sure the company, the EAS, is as efficient as it can be, and to also maximise the use of resource that we have by partnering up with schools and looking at different models for school improvement. So overall, in terms of value for money, I think we're getting a good deal, and we're spending a lot less now than we were previously. I think the model then, in terms of the support that is going into schools, as we've tried to outline in the paper, and Debbie, of course, can talk more about this in detail, is very multi-layered. But I come back to where we've seen schools go into a category, or where we've had to use statutory powers, and we've obviously used statutory powers with other schools in the past, where that recovery happens well and quickly is where we get a very strong level of engagement and recognition from the school, from the leadership team, from the governing body, that actually they need to work with us to get change. And most of our schools who have had a statutory warning notice from us in the past, the turnaround's been within a year, 18 months. Where we don't get that agreement, and where maybe there's some difference of opinion, that's where things slow down. So that's where we can get into some difficulty. But I'll ask Debbie just to talk about the support maybe for that other point.
In the papers that you had, Appendix 3 details the other multifaceted layers of support that schools have. So Torfaen Council does pay into a service. That contribution has decreased by agreement over the years, but Appendix 3 notes that the Challenge Advisor is a small part of that package. So whilst you add up the days, they're nationally agreed days. So we're working within a framework of agreement of the colours, the levels of support. But beyond that, didn't really know how far to go in this paper, so we've kept it very strategic. But there are a wide range of other types of support that both schools have accessed over the years, and that can range from learning from other schools, mentor heads going in from schools outside the region, teaching support, so classroom practice, working alongside teachers to help them to improve their practice. So it's not just the Challenge Advisor support that goes into your schools. There is a broad package, and all of that package is bespoke to the school needs, not just in secondary and primary, in your special schools and in your PRUs. So Appendix 3 notes that broad package is alongside the Challenge Advisors.
Thank you both for that, but from my perspective, and I'm sure a lot of parents out there, and just remind everyone that we are all corporate parents here in this room, we don't seem to think that there's value for money.
Leader, did you want to come in on that one? Or just general? Okay, I'll bring you in a bit later then. Let's keep it in line. Liz, I've got you again next. No? Okay, Rob Kemp then.
Thank you, Chair. Can I start with some positive news, if you like, in regarding the primary schools? I know Torfaen has worked exceptionally hard with the primary schools, and at the end of the day, that relates to the figures in the, if like in the graph, if you like, when you look at the primary schools, out of the 25 primary schools, there's only 3 which are currently in red or amber category, and so that's extremely good news. However, if you like, when it comes to the secondary schools, if like it is completely the opposite. What I'm getting frustrated about is that the information coming across from the panel today is that it's given me the impression that the lack of performance is new, if you like, and it's not, if you like. I brought to Council many questions regarding education over many years, if you like, because the writing was on the door, as the saying goes. Like, if you look at the top graph on page 5, in regarding the categorisation, if you like, there's only 6 comprehensive schools, if you like, in Torfaen, and since 2016 to 2019, 5 has been in either red or amber, all right, apart from St Albans, and to be fair, they're doing exceptionally well. If like they are the only school which is in the green category, and so from my stance, if you like, there's no progression. If you like, there hasn't been any progression since going on with these stats since 17 as such, and that is my genuine concern. In regarding the support, okay, we've got the EAS, but for me, if you like, one of the biggest support that should be within the school is the governing body. And again, I've asked questions over the years in regarding the performance of the governing body, in particular when it comes to the local authority. Yes, the schools have the right to appoint, if you like, but when it comes to the local authority governors, they are appointed by ourselves. And when at the last elections we had an influx of new councillors, and then these new councillors, or there was a certain number of these new councillors, were basically appointed onto comprehensive schools. Now, my question is basically in regarding their knowledge and experience and training, because we know that when it comes to governors, there's only 2 bits of mandatory or statutory training that they have to do. And so part of being a governor is to challenge. And I have always questioned, because I've been a former governor myself, albeit on a primary school. And basically, the vast majority of governors cannot challenge or do not, or should they haven't had the necessary training to be able to challenge. If like when you're looking at the heads or the team within the schools, especially the comprehensive schools, these are formidable people, as in heads and deputy heads, etc. And it takes a strong person, whoever they are, to challenge them. And my question is basically the fact that looking at the timescales since 2015, if you like, whether or not the governing bodies have been strong enough to actually challenge the heads in these positions. And I don't think they have, if you like. You might have a strong chairperson or as such, but there's extra responsibilities which comes along with just attending termly governors' meetings within comprehensive school. And so my question, or one of my questions, is basically moving forward, that the fact that from the combined comprehensive school, an application I believe has now gone in to dissolve the governing body, or shortly to be going in. That's better. Shortly to be going in if like, which I would welcome. I really would. My concern is basically at some point, there would be a new governing body that is formed. And for me, it's basically who's going to make up the governing body, and basically what training are these governing bodies, people going to have to undertake from a local authority stance to be an LA governor, because it is not just a case of just doing 2 mandatory training sessions and then being put onto a comprehensive school governing body. I've got more, but I will leave it there for the moment.
I'll try and capture everything that was. I mean, look, generally, I agree with you in terms of, governors are critical to the success of schools, and it is a tough ask. Governors are volunteers, and to go into a governing body and to tackle an issue that's complex as school improvement, and complex as how do we drive up performance in Key Stage 4, or any of the other issues, the many issues that secondary schools and primary schools face, is really tough. It's a big ask. Obviously, the law is the law, and the way that things are constituted at the moment, schools have governing bodies, and there are rules around what training they need to receive and so on. I think there's a general point here about what is the role of governors going forward for us as a nation, and again, I think that's something that Welsh Government are probably looking at, and again, we've had in our thoughts to that. Going into the specifics, I just need to make very clear, the paper going to Councillor Ewells to decide whether or not the local authority writes to the Welsh Government to ask for them to consider it. That step hasn't been taken at all, so I just make that very clear. I think I can say, in the process that's outlined within Schools Cause and Concern, in the instance where an IEB is appointed, the local authority is required to nominate who gets appointed to the IEB. Would obviously take advice from Welsh Government and the EAS and others in that process. We have to say how long that body would be in place for. And at the end of that period, or towards the end of that period, there has to be a 6-month overlap where a shadow governing body is in place together with the IEB. It would be at that point that we'd look at who would be best placed to be in the governing body, but it would be constituted in lines with the current regulations. So we wouldn't choose who's on the governing body. It would be the same rules of engagement to the constitution of a shadow governing body, say for a new school. So we wouldn't choose. And at that point, we've got no rights to determine what training people would have to have other than the statutory minimum. We would clearly want to look at, and as we do, we added, and I'll ask Debbie to come in on this to talk about the government training that is available. The local authority already provides a range of additional training opportunities over and above what the EAS provide around specific issues, around funding, for example, around safeguarding for governors. That's over and above, but we can't require governors to attend those because those are the rules that we have to live by. We can't enforce that. But perhaps, Debbie, you might want to talk about the support to governors in general.
Just building on what Dermot has already said, completely agree with the points that you've raised around governing bodies. One of the other elements that we have to work with governing bodies is they're a key part of leadership. And the points that you raised around being able to challenge effectively, I would agree with. One of the tools that all governing bodies across Torfaen have access to, and a full training package is available, and many of your schools actually take up that opportunity, is around the development of their understanding of self-evaluation, of how they can effectively challenge and use the evidence that's in front of them to work with head teachers and the deputies and other leaders within the school. So that package is there, and I think Dermot said in one of his responses to one of his previous questions, it's about a collective understanding of what needs to improve. So the support is there for governing bodies. But one of the other angles that Dermot picked up on is that it's not mandatory. So there are, as you rightly say, only a small number of mandatory courses, for want of a better phrase, that governors have to attend. But there is a raft of other training that is available to governors, but of course that's not anything that we can require governors to do. Could I just pick up on one of the point you raised at the very beginning around the categorisation and the colours? Just to pick up on that the overall colour, as you state, the facts speak for themselves in the table, but the overall colour of support is around the confidence that the local authority has in the school being able to generate improvement for itself at a required pace. So if we pick, say, two schools, for example, Westmon is a school that was placed in a category of Estin Review. That's in the public domain, it's well known. And actually Westmon has made progress and has been removed from that category. But we still feel that there are some vulnerabilities and the school still needs a level of support to make sure that that progress is sustained. Abersucken is the same. So Abersucken was a school that was in significant improvement. It has made progress, it's been removed from that category over time, but we still feel collectively that to remove the support from the school wouldn't be the right thing to do at this point in time. So there's always a story behind some of those figures, but the schools are making progress underneath some of those high-level colours. So I think it's important just to look beneath that as well, just by way of explanation, really.
If I can come back, in regarding the colours, if you like, I look at this report from the public's point of view. That's what I'm looking at, if like as such. And so basically the information I'm getting is basically over the last, since 2000 and 2016, 5 of the schools are still in red and amber. And for me, if like, as a layperson, I feel like there hadn't been very little progress. Going back very quickly into the governorship, I totally agree with what the leader did when it came to the wording of volunteers. Yes, we are short of volunteers at the end of the day. But for me, if you've got if we've got failing schools, we need quality at the end of the day. We really do. And if we as a council need to change laws, if you like, then we should be allowed to basically voice the fact that there's only 2 areas of mandatory training, if you like. One of them is safeguarding. Everything is to do with safeguarding these days. However, that doesn't necessarily improve the performance of a school's or a child's education, if you like. There needs to be change in legislation or laws to say that these people or these governors going into schools, if like, and I'm sorry to say it, we might have to pay them. We might have to pay them, if like, to be governors at the end of the day. We need to look at basically the governing bodies and basically make sure that the people that we, in inverted commas, employ are the right people to get the necessary standards within the educational system within Torfaen. That's all I'm going to say at the moment. Thank you.
Okay, I've got Louise Shepherd next. Thank you, Chair. Going back to December when I asked many questions, when Cumbrae High went into special measures, I didn't really get any clear responses, but there were a few concerning emails. It was regarding the EAS Key Stage 3 review and the EAS Leadership Review. And it was stated that Head of Education had changed the judgments of strong progress to limited progress, was obviously the first where they were made by experts. I just want to know, is it true and why? How can we just said obviously the local authority, we've got no immediate control. Why were these reports changed, and are we working with or against Eston?
Just to answer the last bit, we're obviously working with Eston and we take careful regard of their advice to us at all times. So the report I think you're referring to was the Challenge Advisor report that came to the local authority, and that was in preparation for the local authority statement of action. Now, any advice we get from the EAS is already subject to an internal verification moderation process, and we go through that again. So we often meet with colleagues from the EAS to look at where their thinking is at, and part of our job as the local authority is to quality assure all the advice we have and interrogate it and just make sure it's coherent. So it's not unusual that a challenge advisor may say, look, I think this is where we are, and then together with colleagues like Debbie and Kirsty who's at the back and other colleagues in the ES will go through a process and interrogate that just to make sure that that is an accurate picture of where the school is, and we'll draw on other information that we have in addition to the challenge advisor. So within the local authority, for example, when we have a case conference on a school, we'll look at the financial position. We'll look at how ready the school is to make decisions, tough decisions, TLR restructure, for example, something that prosecutors go through at the moment. Are schools taking those tough decisions to bring their budget in on where it should be, and also ensure that they've got the range of cover in terms of the curriculum and other support for children? Are they taking HR advice? We ask the education psychologists, the inclusion officers, the educational welfare officers, are the school engaging in the way that we'd expect them to? So the challenge advisor advice is one aspect of what we look at, and obviously we're meeting with these schools on a monthly basis as well. So we put all of that together for the local authority statement of action, and we take a view. So it's not unusual that if someone gives us one piece of advice, we might say, well, thanks for that, but actually we'll moderate that and we'll come to a collective view of actually what's the most accurate picture for the school. I would obviously hasten to add that in that particular instance, I think Eston agreed with our view.
We've just gone from what was recommended was strong to limited. It's like, you know, there's a big bandwidth. You know, if these are experts and they're saying they're strong and we're coming back as limited, are they really experts? Why not satisfactory? How were we so wrong?
Can I just ask for some clarity? Are you referring to the Key Stage 3 review? That was, yeah, okay, just to be clear. So the Key Stage 3 review that was undertaken in the school was very much what it says on the tin. It was a review of Key Stage 3, so not the overall whole school recommendation. So it was looking at a small, well, one of the key stages, obviously, within the school. And what I would say is when Eston revisited the comments that they made within the report regarding Key Stage 3, they themselves noted progress. So they themselves noted progress had been made across elements in Key Stage 3, particularly around the development of skills, which was very much what the Key Stage 3 skills review said as part of that agenda. When Eston reported on the school, in the later statements that you reference, they look at the progress that the whole school is making, but particularly, again, the outcomes at Key Stage 4. So it was one small part of the review.
Okay, I've got Hugh Bevan next.
Yes, thank you, Madam Presiding Officer. I want to pick up on a couple of points, please, if I may. I'm not going to go through the whole timeline, but I want to go through part of it. Eston flagged this up December 2015, and then we issued a pre-statutory warning letter to the school's governing body in October 2016. First question, was the council slow to act initially? The next thing, obviously once I can see when the council did act, it was necessary to reinforce the Board of Governors. This was after further Eston visit in June 2017. July 2017, we issued the warning notice and we reinforced the Board of Governors with additional appointments. Obviously, the new governors identified an issue with leadership, and a leadership review was then conducted in November 2017, and bespoke support was provided. I don't want to use the word blame, but there's got to be an element of accountability here. I'm not necessarily blaming the governors, because it seems that once the additional governors were appointed, they did identify potentially the cause of the problem. The report actually condemns the leadership of the school, and they clearly failed to deliver outcomes that they told the governing body and the local authority that they would achieve. Now, that was obviously the failing in this particular school, unfortunately. My second question is with regards to the actions that have been taken since the departure of the head, where, again, we are saying we are providing additional bespoke support. Why did the initial bespoke support that was provided to the leadership team back in November 2017, why did that fail to deliver the desired outcomes? What lessons have been learned from that? And how is this bespoke support that we're providing now different from the bespoke support that was provided back in November 2017?
I'd begin by saying that obviously from 2015 to 2017, the Challenge Advisor support was provided by Schools Challenge Cymru. That was a government initiative, and those Challenge Advisors, I think, were directly appointed by Welsh Government. We had some frustrations at the time, which I think we expressed in the Chamber, and we expressed with Welsh Government about our ability to really... they weren't within our direct line management, they weren't within our direct control, so we've expressed those concerns. I'm not saying that as an excuse, because we clearly raised the information, as I just explained to Councillor Shepherd. We still have a very rich picture of schools' performance, and we did feed that in at the time, but there was a bit of frustration. I think what you can see through this timeline is that, notwithstanding we have to have an evidence base to use statutory measures, we've taken steps as quickly as possible once we've reached that evidence threshold. I think it's probably a little bit, I would disagree with you, I'm afraid, in terms of was it the governing body who raised the issue around leadership. If anything, that's been a focal point of debate with us and the governing body. All I can say is I think we've used the statutory processes which are all open to challenge. And there was an instance, I think, back before in Fairwater when the previous Director of Education, as it was then, applied for an IEB, and that was rejected because the evidence threshold wasn't reached. So we're very mindful of experience in the past, and we have to make sure, to be fair to the governing body and to the leadership team in the school, that we're doing everything that we can to support them and evidence where we're not getting the level of engagement. So I think we've followed through in terms of what we're able to do as quickly as we possibly can. And applying for an IEB is a very significant step, and it's something that requires a very considerable body of evidence. I can't talk about it in detail, but of course the report is available on u.gov, which Councillor Yule will consider next week. There was another point, sorry, in terms of the support. Why did the bespoke support not work before? It's very difficult for me to answer this in detail because I only talk about individuals. What I would say is, where we are now with the school, the key for the school moving forward is to get clarity around leadership overall. So we will be looking to appoint a very experienced head teacher. That advert will go out in September, and the governing body have agreed to that. And in the meantime, we're trying to secure a very experienced head teacher for the period between September and the end of December. We've put in every support that we've seen to work in lots of other schools, where experience elsewhere would indicate has been very effective. And as Debbie's mentioned already, where some of our schools have gone into category, we've seen them come out very rapidly and using those supports and some other supports, and they have been effective. So I think we're looking at in this particular school, because we haven't talked about YGG at all, we're seeing a particular set of circumstances, and we now expect, with the steps that we're taking that we've outlined in the report, to make quite rapid progress. But the school's in a very difficult position, as councillors have said. It will take some time for that school to really progress, but we stand ready to put every possible support in place, and we'll continue to look at practice across the region. So, Debbie and I meet with the other 4 directors, we compare notes, in effect, about challenges in other schools in the region and beyond, and support each other about, well, what's working in Monmouthshire, what's working in Newport, what's not working here or there, and look to see how we can actually build on that experience collectively to get the best possible outcome as quickly as possible. And those meetings are happening regularly throughout the year, and a process that head teachers are aware of and that we share with them.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Officer, and thank you for that detailed answer. So, in a nutshell, then, lessons have been learned from what happened back in November 2017, and perhaps it's clear that the one approach is not going to work in every single school, that there are specific individual circumstances. The second question I wanted to ask on a completely separate subject, please, was with regards to Annex 1, which is on page, I think, 21, it's Torvine School categorisations for the 2017-18 academic year. Pontier Church in Wales School is flagged up as red. Can you please advise what supportive measures are being taken on that?
Because categorisation changes, and we anticipate that categorisation will change now, is the report published?
No.
No. All I can say is that they've had a recent Essendon inspection. We're very pleased with the outcome. So there's been a significant package of support that's gone in. Obviously, there's a new head teacher in place. Lots of support from colleagues across the local authority and the EAS to address the issues that were raised by Essendon. And all I can say is look out for the report. It's very positive.
Okay, got the leader next.
Okay, thank you, Presiding Member. Can I start by agreeing with something I think Councillor Evans said earlier about thanking staff and thanking governors in our schools as well. I think that's important because today's the last day of term for many of our schools. And quite rightly, meetings like this focus on areas for improvement. But I think we also need to recognise the hard work of our staff in schools and governors in schools who go above and beyond the call of duty. Because, you know, if we don't recognise that, I think there's a danger that the meetings like today just demotivate them by thinking that we're only here to bash them. Because it is, at the end of the day, it's very easy to criticise. It's much harder to help affect change, especially in complex organisations like schools. Schools aren't sort of factories where you can just put a change to the machine or the input into the machine and then something magically comes out according to a formula. They're complex places. And I just wanted to start, therefore, by paying tribute to the staff and governors, whilst recognising the challenges that do exist. I think it's key to get that balance right, because there are governors both in this room and beyond who've really gone above and beyond the call of duty as governors to do their best for schools. But it's also key that we're honest in our assessment, and I'd like to thank Dermot for an honest and detailed report that shows that there is the self-awareness of where we do need to improve. I guess my real question is twofold, really. First of all, what can we do, those of us in this room, to help affect positive change on the outside? For example, I'm a governor at 2 primary schools. It's clear from this report that the challenge that we face is in secondary schools. Would I be better off volunteering my time in a secondary school instead? So that's one question I'd ask. The second question is again, I think Councillor Kemp has a point when he talks about how can we get more people in as governors with the right range of skills and expertise. I think that's a genuine question that we need to ask. And my other question is, obviously as part of the process where we came out of special measures, we looked very much at best practice elsewhere in Wales. How can we learn from the experience in other areas, especially areas that are similar to ours? It strikes me as leadership in schools is key, and all areas like ours struggle to both attract and retain that high quality school leadership. How can we look at what's worked elsewhere so that we can get the best people in our schools? I was drawn to the point that you made that the vast majority of our investment in this area, and I think we do invest in it as a council as a priority area, is within the schools themselves, and we're paying head teachers a decent salary. How can we make sure that the people that we get are the best possible school leaders? Because that seems to me to be if there is anything binary in this process, that's the division between success and struggling is the quality of the leaders that we get in. So really, what can we do to help as councillors, both in this chamber and outside? How do we make sure we attract the best possible governors and school leaders? And how do we look to best practice across Wales?
I'll start. You join in. Yeah. Obviously, I mean, in terms of what people in this chamber can do, I think today is really helpful. I think it's really good to cast a light on the issues in schools and to have absolute clarity about where we are. So I really welcome that, and I'm happy to continue to have these sorts of discussions, because I think they really build the debate about how we can drive standards forward. Clearly, you're going to expect me to say, if you're not a school governor at the moment, I'm sure that colleagues in the ES would help put on some bespoke training, perhaps, and we can really make sure that everybody here who's not a governor already could sign up. That would be really welcome. We're always looking for local authority governors, and we do try to provide additional briefings and training opportunities for those governors, so I'd really welcome that. If we can pass a list around at the end, I'll collect names. That would be really helpful. I think in terms of, there is a question there about, we've got real strength in where we are at primary at the moment, and I think you raise a good point about, do we have a debate with our primary colleagues, governor colleagues, about are they using their talents in the best way, and that's something I think we can reflect on and take forward as well. In terms of recruiting more, recruiting the best staff. I think one of the things I need to point out is when we go out to advert, we've had quite a significant change in staff. There's lots of change in schools every year. We're not really encountering difficulty in recruiting. No. So we've actually recruited in some very, very high quality colleagues from other authorities over the recent years, which I find very heartening. I think that's part of the issue around that is because they recognise through our collaboration and work with the EAS, there is very high quality support within the region in terms of professional development and other support to staff at all levels. I think, for particular instances where we're looking at schools in difficulty, we need to think very carefully about how we provide mentoring support and wraparound support from the local authority and EAS for those heads. But overall, the support that we have available already means that we're actually not encountering great difficulty in recruitment, touch wood, so far. But I'll just ask Deputy Commander.
I think one of the things that would be incredibly helpful is if there are those of you in the room that are willing to step up and put yourselves forward to be part of that increasing cadre that we require at secondary school level. We would be more than welcome to do some bespoke work in Torfaen with you to provide some additional support and guidance around the area of governance, as you think is best suited to yourselves. With regards to recruitment, like Dermot said, there isn't an issue with school leaders applying for posts within Torfaen specifically. What there is an issue with is identifying those aspiring leaders coming through the system. So there is an ageing population. You'll have done your stats within your school sector. There is an ageing population of school leaders, not just in Torfaen but across our region. And it is incumbent upon the EAS to work with you as a council to spot those young or not so young staff within schools that want to step into that leadership role, whether that be leading learning, whether that be at deputy head level, or indeed whether they're aspiring to be head teachers. So all of you that are governors in the room, it's a plea really to go back to your schools and ask, where are our aspiring leaders? Are they taking up the opportunities that are there for them to gain accredited courses through our universities? There is a pathway for every aspiring leader within schools at the moment, but there aren't a huge number of those staff coming forward. So I think there is a piece of work that collectively we can do, first of all to identify those aspiring leaders, but also to keep them within your system, within your local authority. We don't want those people going outside. We want to nurture them, and there are some excellent practitioners within your schools, and we need to grow them and we need to make them feel valued. So I think from my perspective, that's where I would say we could add some value.
Adding on to that, I want to suggest with school governors that perhaps as a council we could proactively advertise, particularly to business, etc. Because I find talking to people, unless they have children, their assumption is you have to be a parent to be a governor, rather than, and obviously there's a community option, etc., etc. So perhaps that's something we could look at through our comms team to just get that word out there that, you can do it and we are looking for them. Okay, then I've got Glyn Karen next.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'd like to make a few comments before I come to my question. There's been a few things mentioned about budgets. Debbie was the first, I think, to mention the Schools Challenge Cymru. It was a Welsh Government scheme that gave money to schools, considerable quantities of money, and every single one of the ones in Torfaen did not improve over the period that they were under the charge of the Schools Challenge Cymru, and Cwmbran High was one of them. So I don't think we can really make too much of the fact that budgets are to blame for any of the problems that we have. I think perhaps in Cwmbran High, the fact that it was a Schools Challenge Cymru school did not help it at all. I would like to say, I've looked at in depth, I'm not talking about a school, YGG, I'm talking now about Cumbrae High. I've looked in depth at each of the reports from Estin. In 2014, that school was considered to be adequate. There were 5 recommendations.
Point of information, the school didn't open until 2015.
You
said 2014.
Sorry, 2015. Give me 1 second. Oh, can't find it. But yeah, okay. The original report from Estin for that school said that the school was adequate. It made 5 recommendations. On the follow-up, 3 of those 5 recommendations were satisfactory, 2 were limited. There is now a further follow-up which has put the school into special measures. But if you read the report in depth, it is talking about a minority of teachers, a minority of lessons, and it is talking about nearly all teachers are doing well within the school. So I think we do need to follow up on what Stuart said. There is a lot of good work going on, even in a school that is in special measures. But my concern and my question really is for Debbie, in the sense that there's a lot going on in education at the moment. We now have 2 secondary schools in special measures. There's changes to the national curriculum. We are now gearing up to do school-to-school peer learning. And there is a continuing downward trend in the EAS budget. Basically, is there enough funds within the EAS to do the work that is needed in both these schools over the next couple of years?
Thank you. Didn't see that one coming. Both Ysgol Gyfun Gwynllw and Cumbrae High are receiving the highest levels of support. And I don't mean this in a flippant way. It so happens that Estin have visited during that time. So the levels of support remain the same. Estin give us a layer of additional information in the schools, but from a challenge advisor perspective, that won't change. And that is exactly what the funding methodology from Torfaen and the other local authorities is based upon. So from that perspective, there are no concerns. The EAS, as it's currently funded, is funded in 2 ways. So we're funded 50% roughly core funding that we receive from the 5 councils across South East Wales, and 50% roughly, it changes a little bit year on year, is funded via grants directly from Welsh Government. So when the chair of the EAS board makes contact with leaders in councils every year, we are absolutely aware that we have a role to play in contributing to the efficiencies that each of the councils need to make. We see ourselves as an integral partner to that. So we have been able as a service to be able to offer up initially 3% efficiency savings and more latterly 2% efficiency savings year on year. I believe that if the core funding and the grant funding remain as they are currently within this year, the EAS will still need to make efficiency savings to set a balanced budget for the next financial year. I believe we would be able to deliver a quality service if the funding methodology remains as it is. If we are required to take significant cuts, then of course something has got to give. We're not in any different position. We're much smaller, we're tiny compared to yourselves as a council, but we would have to look at the service that we deliver. But we would do that through discussions with the Joint Executive Group, the executive members across the 5 councils, and ultimately we're owned by the councils, so we would be then delivering possibly a changed commission. But I think if things remain as it is, Councillor Carroll, I think we'd be able to deliver for the next financial year in the same way that we are, if budgets remain the same. And we gave an indicative indication that we would be able to offer up a 2% efficiency saving for the next financial year. Who knows what the budgets are going to bring in. But the categorisation of schools is something that would drive our model and takes priority. We want to make sure that there's enough support in the system.
Okay, Colette? Can I just say, I think Rob made some very good points when he was talking about school governors. And at several of these schools monitoring committees over the years, we've asked the question to the heads, you know, about the local authority governors. And I think we need to be monitoring the governors. We did ask if the EAS could report to the cabinet member about the attendance of local authority governors. And I think when we're looking at improvements, I think that's something that we can look at. The other point I'd like to ask is about Gyffyn Gwynthlew. I see that over the results have declined over the last 4 years. I'd just like to know, were they issued with a warning letter from the authority? And if not, why not? And do we think that we've been early enough in intervening?
In terms of monitoring governor attendance, I think if we were going to monitor governor attendance in public, sorry?
LEA governor attendance.
Yeah, well, I'm talking about all governors, because I think if we only monitor one group, it would be a bit unfair. We probably want to monitor them all. And then we need to just make that clear to governors. That takes us back into the discussion, I suppose, about if governors feel as a volunteer that they're going to be monitored, and if they attend or don't attend, what's going to happen. I think we need to be very careful about that level of accountability. What I would say is that there is a process that Council has agreed for the removal of local authority governors. And if we looked at, I don't have an issue with necessarily us going forward and saying, look, if you're going to be a local authority governor, we will monitor attendance, and that we build that into the process that does exist already for the removal of local authority governors, because that attendance can be very variable, and clearly they're key positions, and we want to make sure we're getting value from them. So I think there's something we could do there, but we clearly need to start doing, if we're going to make a change, we need to signal it and bring that in as part of the policy, and we tie it into a review of that policy that exists about local authority governors, so we could take that forward. Sorry, the second point then was about Ysgol Gwynthlew. We monitor attendance with all schools very, very closely. Sorry, was the point about attendance or?
The point was about the Eston report and about the decline in standards over the last 4 years, and whether the authorities intervened timely.
Yeah, okay. So in terms of 4 years ago, the school actually had an Eston inspection which said it was good. That was under a different framework. I think at that time we were working with the school, different head teacher, and some significant changes, different governing body in many ways, although some of those colleagues persist. And we did raise our concerns with the school at the time. When the school gets a good report from Eston, it's very tricky for the local authority to come in and say, we've got concerns about where you are. But we did make that challenge. The current head teacher has been in post for the last 2 years. And we were very, we talked about recruitment earlier, and I should make a correction. It's very difficult to recruit for leadership roles in faith schools and in Welsh medium schools. It's very difficult. We've got a very strong candidate in the current head teacher. We made sure that we were very clear with her from the beginning what the tasks and the challenges in the school were. And she took on that role knowing what was going to be required. So we worked very closely with the governing body at that point and the head teacher, and left no one under any illusions about our level of concern. We've seen a level of engagement and commitment from that governing body and from that head teacher, and we've seen them make significant progress. There are special measures, and I think the report does give some recognition to the changes that the head teacher has brought in, which I think are really important to note, and made the point that they haven't had time yet to show full impact. The school continues to make good progress and continues to tackle some very tough decisions and some very tough issues, and the head, with the government, the support of the governing body, is getting on with that. So in those instances, it would be very hard for us to justify giving a warning notice, for example, telling the school to do something they're already doing. So in that instance, we didn't reach the threshold because the school were already cognizant and were taking steps.
Just to pick up on the Eston report in 14, if I remember rightly, was a good judgment in the old framework. There was an adequate judgment, if I recall rightly, around improving quality, I think, at that point in time. So you can see from the support overview that from 16-17, the levels of support to Gwynllw increased. And that was based on the outcomes of a leadership review that took place in the school, where specific areas were noted as requiring improvement. So, as Dermot has said, I don't want to repeat it, the school is engaged fully from that period, and particularly with the new head teacher taking up post. But there does continue to need to be improvement in departments, particularly around maths. You'll note from the performance over time, it's been fairly sporadic, I think is probably the best way to put it. So we believe that the school is responding well at this point in time. The pace being made is appropriate. And the course of direction, even though the Eston inspection has taken place, is not changing in any significant way at all.
Ask on that then. The support for the last academic year was 20 days. So do you intend to increase the support as well?
So it's 20 days up to where we were writing the report. So you can see it spans between amber and red, purely because if a school goes into special measures, the national guidance is that a school is placed in the highest levels of support automatically. So the school had increased levels of support based on the judgment. So the 20 days is where we are up to at the time of writing this report. I wouldn't imagine that would change significantly as we move forward over the next academic year, but the plan for the support will remain exactly the same.
Sorry, obviously subject to the discussion, as I mentioned there, that we'll have with Eston. So a really helpful feature of the new framework with Eston is that we'll get together with colleagues from the ES to look at the support plan from the local authority and what the ES are going to put in together with the school, and we'll have that challenging discussion with Eston, and they'll challenge both of us about, is this okay, is it enough, what other support should the local authority put in if they feel that something's appropriate, and that discussion will happen at the end of September. So there's another level of challenge there as well.
Okay, Faye Jones next. I'd just like to ask, do we feel, we've talked a lot about education and different aspects of it and support and governors and head teachers and leadership, but do we think that deprivation, because we have huge pockets, excuse me, of deprivation income in Torfaen, do we think that deprivation plays a part in how children are able to access education and how they're motivated and how well they do? And I just wanted to ask as well, do we get support from other agencies outside of the education system?
It does play a part. Absolutely, it can't be underplayed. And particularly one question raised by, I can't remember who it was, but a councillor early on, was around the changes to the exam systems at Key Stage 4. And much evidence will show over time that those learners who were challenged by poverty struggle to adapt to some of those changes that their peers may not. So yes, there are challenges outside of that, and of course you'll be aware that all your schools are in receipt of the Pupil Development Grant, so PDG. That'll be familiar to you, and there are quite significant sums going into your schools across the region and across your local authority to assist schools to be able to better equip the needs of those learners. So one of the processes that we've implemented this year with Torfaen is to take a closer look at how schools are allocating that level of funding, because it is significant, and we are using research and best practice from institutions and research institutions to help us to look at things that are proven to make a difference to learners. But there's no silver bullet here. Some of these challenges are very complex, as you state, but that process, I think, will be helpful. And I think it enables you as a council to be able to hold schools more fully to account for the ways in which they're allocating that grant, but more importantly, the difference and impact it's having on those groups of learners. So from an EAS perspective, that's what much of our work is on this year. Also, from an EAS perspective, we have also funded in every one of your secondary schools, I think we note it in the paper, a contribution, I think it's £10,800, towards a senior member of staff in every one of your secondary schools to focus on vulnerable learners. We're calling them a vulnerable learner lead, but schools may choose to call it something different. But in essence, it is about providing that one person with bespoke professional learning over the next academic year, funding their access to best practice, and working alongside them and matching them up with schools that have similar challenges but have better outcomes for those groups of learners. So again, that's something that you would probably want to hear more about as the year goes on. But again, we feel that that's something that will help your schools to be able to learn from best practice, but also to upskill practitioners in areas maybe that they have been unaware of in the past. So from an EAS perspective, that's where we're focusing our work. I'm sure Dermot will want to add a bit more.
Not really. I mean, I think the key for us is to make sure that schools are using the funding that they receive, which is considerable, as wisely as possible, but also to combine the funding that they get from a variety of sources as smartly as they can. So the process that Debbie's discussed this year has meant that we've asked schools to really look in some detail to justify against the research about what we know works, why they're making the choices that they are. We don't want people just to think about the staff they currently have or the inputs they currently have. What will work best for children? And there's a body of good research, and the ES has provided schools with a framework around that. And we ask schools to justify, well, why are you spending the money the way you are? That's been a bit challenging for some schools, to be fair. But we think it's really important. There's a huge investment from Welsh Government coming in. And quite rightly, the Minister asks us, well, what are we getting for that outcome? And sometimes that's not always been quite easy to look at. So we now have a much greater level of support for schools in terms of saying what's the best way to go forward and offering them a suite of advice on that. And also an ability now to look in some detail about what's being provided and then look at the impact that that's providing for learners. But there is no silver bullet, as Debbie said. This is a really multifaceted approach, because it won't just be education, what happens in school that makes an impact. It's what happens throughout the child's entire life. So some of it, that's why as part of T22 we're working with social care and other agencies within the authority to look at how do we support all vulnerable learners and intervene early. So we do look outward and look at how we can work with partners in health and CAMS and so on as well. But the focus on this particular grant is very much tied into that new structure that Debbie's described.
I think that's great, but do you think that the amount of interagency work on the coalface, if you like, is enough to inform all educators of what's going on in the community and enough to give community support, which will add into motivation for education in the families who need to access education at secondary level and things?
We've had this chat before, separately in another form. The answer is no. And there's a lot more we can do in terms of how we can look at interagency and transdisciplinary sort of working. And again, that takes us back to the discussions we're having and some of the work that James and other colleagues are doing as part of T22, looking at the front door for social care, for example, and how we can join up and integrate with the police, with health, education and so on. The space and wellbeing pilot that's being funded through the transformation funding at the moment. Some work we're doing in education to join up with sports development plans. So we're doing a lot to look at how do we make sure we get the best out of all the resources we currently have, because we're not in a rich environment, to make sure that we're doing the best possible linking in terms of our data, in terms of our sharing of that information as well. And we've got some really good examples of how that's been taken forward, but there's more to be done, and that's what T22 in part's about too.
Just also to note that each of the clusters, so the secondary school and the primary feeders across Torfaen, have all had access to additional funding to create a wellbeing map for each of their clusters, to enable them to have signposts, because each of the communities are very different, signposts to where those services exist, and to try to look at common practices between each of the feeder primaries going into each of the secondary schools, so that it supports families as they move at that really critical point of transition from primary into secondary school, and indeed from foundation phase into Key Stage 2, because there are differences even though it's still in the same school. So that's also one piece of work. Something else that probably would be of interest is the role around ACEs, so adverse childhood experiences. Again, working really closely with Public Health Wales. All of your clusters now across Torfaen have had access to bespoke training for all practitioners in schools to enable the professionals within schools to have more tools in their toolkit, to enable them to address some of the really complex needs that some learners are presenting within schools. So they're all vulnerable, all vulnerabilities. So again, that's something just to add a layer to what Dermot has already said.
Thank you very much.
Veronica next.
Sorry, apologies for that, Madam President. I really wanted to go back quite a few stages, actually, with regard to the role of the Governor. I think it's important, because we've got a wider audience today, that it's appreciated that it's not just a termly meeting that a Governor will attend. There are numerous committees, thinking just off the top of my head, pastoral, resources, teaching and learning, a lot of ad hoc meetings too that governors may go to. So it's not just a one-off every 3 or 4 months. It's a much greater commitment than that. And it's through that if we're talking about learning, that's how people learn. Again, with assistance from the courses that go on, that deepens their learning and makes it more relevant. But for those who are looking at becoming a governor, I think it's important that they realise that it's something you have to take fairly seriously. We appreciate as councillors that we have a corporate role as parents, but once you become a governor, you're looking at it in a different way again. I appreciate the frustrations people have been commenting on today. I also appreciate the work that is being done in the schools where I'm the governor in Cross Caerleoch. I'm very aware of changes that are taking place and will be taking place over the next few years. And I hope that with the guidance and the backing that staff are getting, they will be able to achieve the challenges that are coming forward. So I'm just trying to be positive, really, rather than ask further questions. I think we've had a tremendous range of questions today, and I hope it's meant that we all have a greater appreciation of just what's going on in our local education system. Thank you.
Ronnie Burnett next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, it's sad that we once here again. I mean, over the years, it's like deja vu to a lot of us. It's been talked about the governance, the governors, the governing body, budgets. There's so many questions being put forward today, but I'd like to go in a bit more depth. I mean, I've written a lot of things down here, and it's teachers. We have some excellent teachers out there. and I know a lot about Cwmbran High now, as it was Fairwater, then when it amalgamated with Llantarnam, which was a sad day there as well. There were a lot of challenges there. There were a lot of problems there, and I see it carrying on today. And we talk about attendance of children, and I just wonder what the attendance of teachers are. There's a lot of teachers gone sick there, a lot of teachers finished. Today, I would not want to be a teacher, that's for sure. We've talked about recruitment and getting people with guidance. The teachers need a lot of guidance today, and I know there's lots of problems, not just in Cwmbran High, in all schools, behavioural problems. The teachers that I know have just walked out from school, near to breakdown, can't take it anymore. And I wonder how we support those teachers. I know a teacher had to finish on ill health, just couldn't take it anymore. And wasn't a lot of backing for them. They came out and passed the job, and it happens, this and that. But I just wonder what's happening within schools, the problems we have with children there, which affects the learning, which affects where we are today. I would like to know, if we've got the stats on that, what the ratio is with sickness at Fairwater, Cwmbran High at the moment, and we're fully staffed, because I know at one time there were a lot of vacancies. So when you have to bring agency staff in, it's not the same as the other teacher had. The agency just come to pick it up and run it along until another one came in. So that's where a lot of failures come, is what's going on in the schools. And I'm not here to blame the budget or the governance or whatever. I mean, it's here, what are we doing? Again, resources. Do we have enough teachers? No. That's fact. But my biggest thing is getting depth of the problems within the schools. We can blame the governors, we want to blame the budgets, but those teachers, I know some very good teachers in Cwmbran High, and some very teachers have left there. And I was with someone on Saturday at my local fete, and they were telling me that their son is finishing this week, and he's going to Hereford, sixth form, because they have no confidence anymore, and I know them personally, and they're willing to put him on the train every morning, and he's going to Hereford when we have what we've got. But we really do need to work together and get us out of this situation we're in, but look more in depth in the schools, because personally I think that's where a lot of problems come, with inside the school and the problems we have there, and the teachers leaving, as you say, about recruiting. Would anybody here like today to put up for a teaching course? No. And I leave it at that. But I do wish that one day we're going to get out of this position.
I'm not sure what the question was, but I mean, in terms of I think you covered a number of things there, so I'll just try and come back and give you a full response. And we monitor teacher absence, sickness absence, and also teaching assistants absence for all schools, and reporting that back to schools on a monthly basis. And we monitor that actually within the local authority, within my management team regularly as well. So we bring that as a termly report, and we look at patterns of need. We encourage schools to use the tools that are being made available to them by the local authority to do that sort of monitoring internally as well. We're talking about welfare of staff and the well-being of staff, and that's a critical responsibility for all of us, and it's led by the head teacher and the governing body, obviously, because they're the employer and we're there to support them. So we provide lots of tools to the schools to do that, but it's fair to say, and people have rehearsed it today, there's a lot of pressure in the system. There's a lot of pressure from events like this, because I'm sure lots of our staff will be looking at what's being said today. So that's really important to be mindful of. And there's lots of pressure in terms of the change that's coming through the system, in terms of new curriculum and other changes to the accountability framework, and a myriad other changes that happen quietly and just go through. Education's an ever-ending, those of us who, those of you who've been involved directly in education, nothing stays the same. Our experience sat here of what we remember of school is very different to what schools are like now. And that's a really demanding, high-pressure environment for lots of our staff. So we work very closely through HR and through, Debbie's mentioned well-being networks, but we also talk about how do we support well-being of staff in schools. So anytime we do bring in a change or a challenge to schools, and I think this goes to the heart of what we're talking about today, we're particularly mindful of the needs of those staff and that if we do bring a challenge, they have to be evidenced, they have to be fair, and they have to be rooted in what's happening in school. So we're always looking, while we bring that challenge, to also support staff in terms of thinking about what bespoke support they might need, where I certainly, obviously you know my background as a psychologist, I spent a long time with lots of head teachers talking about how we can support them individually, and I mean the head teachers, but also their staff, and look at what's best for them. So absolutely, I think the point you're making overall is that there's a lot of pressure in the system. We need to value, please, we really do need to value the very high quality of staff that we have in all of our schools, and where we've got issues in terms of schools not performing the way we'd want to, we're always mindful about treading carefully but purposefully to make sure we bring about the change that we need to, and not be held back sometimes by concerns that people won't like things. We've got processes in place to make sure that we'll bring about the change that needs to happen, and we'll do that being mindful of the welfare issues for staff and for pupils too, and for their families. But it's, as we've said repeatedly through this presentation, this is a complex issue. No two schools are the same, and we're always having to look at what the bespoke package of support, intervention and challenges for each school. No two schools have ever been the same in my experience. They're all nuanced and different.
Is it okay if I ask a question a minute? Let's ask members if that's all right. Well, yeah, it is up to me, but I don't want to be. Basically, my question, obviously we're looking at sort of data-driven results today, but around the resilience of the children, and in particular, the idea of school as a community. So I think where we're striving very well at primary level is because of all those sort of soft things which go on. I mean, you've got your eco schools, you've got your, they're very, very driven to create that sort of atmosphere where they want to do well for their school, for themselves, for their community. Whereas at secondary level, I find you don't see so much of that. Obviously, because there is so much pressure to achieve good results, but at the same time, by losing focus on that softer side, we create a situation where the children don't feel as driven or as confident even. That creating that resilience is very important. And I was wondering, what resources are we putting into that, and what scope will there be going forward to help support schools to achieve that sense of community?
I think I'd say that you do have secondary schools in Torfaen that do that well. So I think using a blanket approach isn't always necessarily, it doesn't necessarily look to the strengths where there are strengths. But I think the point that was made earlier and the point you make is that secondary schools over the years have been under pressure, and I think it's been a national debate that's been had around quite a narrow set of performance measures. And a number of secondary schools may have, I'm not saying they have, may have taken that opportunity to narrow their curriculum in a way where some of the wider aspects of school life may not have had the prominence that maybe there are in some of the schools that do it well. Okay? But what I would say is part of the change, and it is part of the national change around the new curriculum, resilience is at the heart of where the new curriculum will take us, and I think rightly so, with the learner at the heart and creating resilient learners over time. I think the changes that you'll all see as members this August, particularly around the Key Stage 4 outcomes, are that they look very different this year. They are valuing a wider curriculum. They are valuing performance across the piece. They are looking at vocational performance for those learners, that is absolutely the right pathway for them to take. So there is a change in Wales nationally. It's going to take some time to get there. And I think secondaries will be better for it, in my own personal opinion. But I wouldn't also want to say that all of your secondary schools are not producing resilient learners. And there are classrooms that I've been in across your secondary schools where they absolutely are. So it's not a blanket approach, but I think the future will enable secondary schools to have a greater focus on it per se, and for those learners actually that are not absolutely going to take the academic route, and they are looking at vocational qualifications, which are absolutely critical to society and to your communities as well.
Just to add to that, I mean, obviously that goes back to the question that was raised earlier about, you know, the pressures on young people. Well, needless to say, going through education, I'm sure we've all had really rich, happy experiences of education and never had a bad day in school. I mean, education's always been a pressurised environment for all of us. But actually the pressures on young people these days come from a range of, you know, a significant range of other sources as well as school. And we see our young people facing some significant challenges. Many of our young people in difficulty in terms of mental health and well-being. So for me, this goes back to how do we link in with all of the agencies who are there to support families and children and young people, and with head teachers. And I go back to my answer before about that's why we're looking at how we review all of the support the local authority makes available through the education service and with social care and with colleagues in neighbourhoods. How we're linking up with CAMS, and we've got a number of pieces of work with CAMS. We're just currently advertising for additional educational psychologists. We're going to work with a clinical psychologist and other staff. It'll be based in Torvine, but it'll be working across a cluster of schools in each of the 5 local authorities to look at how we can support well-being and whole school approaches to promote well-being. And hopefully that pilot will get up and running if we can recruit, because there's a shortage of educational psychologists. So we're taking every opportunity we can to join up and to look at how do we support the child throughout their life. And obviously schools play an integral part of that. But the only way we'll get the best possible outcomes is to come together to try and support children before they come to school, when they're in school, and when they're in the community, and their families as well, because there are significant pressures everywhere, not only in schools. So that's part of it.
For that, I mean, because I just wanted to point out, even though I said, you know, we are looking at core results, at the end of the day, it's not the end of the world, you know, if a child has, they can go back, but they need to have the resilience to be able to go back and reset and go forward, you know. And if we're not creating learners who can do that, then, you know, we're really failing them across the board. Okay, I got Rob Kemp next.
Thank you, Chair. Can I change the direction a bit and talk about the financial deficits, if you like, and it's in regarding the information page on page 15. In the grander scheme of things, I'm quite content with the amount of deficit that both schools are in. The fact that there's a plan in place as well, and it's a gettable plan, I don't think there's a problem. What I do have a problem with is when it comes to West Monmouthshire School. Over a good number of years now, we've taken part in the 21st Century Schools programme, and as part of that, we've done our own research and amalgamated schools, and it would seem that the main reason why there's a big deficit was that there's been a rapid increase of pupils, which has led to a significant increase in staff, and that bit of information has come from the executive members' decisions for education dated the 27th of June report. So my question is basically, where have all these extra pupils come from? Have they moved into the area, or have we had the data at our disposal but haven't used the data, which have basically forced West Monmouthshire to go into quite a hefty deficit?
Okay. Is this an aspect of 21st century schools? I don't think it is. I think what we're looking at here are overall populations falling. So it's not an issue of new children coming through from within. This is about relocation of children. West Monmouth has got places. So parents have got choice, and we see parents exercising, well, they've got the right to express a preference, and if there are spaces, then they've got the right to obviously suggest they want to go to West Mon. As Debbie said earlier, West Mon has seen a really good recovery journey, you know, and again, I'm conscious that the head teacher is retiring soon from there, so I'd like to pay tribute to him and the work that he's done, Mr Wickham, in really driving up standards in the school. And I think that's been recognised by the community, is the answer. So we're seeing the way that the financial system works is that you're paid in arrears, in effect. So where you see an increase in numbers, that impacts on your budget settlement a year behind. So that increase in numbers overall has led to a temporary issue, which is why the school needs to have a temporary licence deficit to help them manage that. That's part of the school's funding formula. That's something that's agreed with head teachers through the school's forum, and it's not something we can easily change. We try and smooth that, and there is some contingency within the budgetary systems to help us do that. So this is one of those issues that happens occasionally. You know, I think this is actually a good news story for the school. The school is really popular because parents are wanting to place their children there. And that gives us a temporary issue, and that's being managed.
So that I don't have a problem with taking that further, but the fact that we've got the pupils come in from elsewhere, if like, does that mean then that there's less money going into the other schools because of obviously the rapid intake to Westmont?
I haven't got the exact figures with me about where children are coming. Where children are coming from to go into Westmont, but I think it's pretty evenly spread. I know that Abersacan are particularly conscious of numbers going into Westmont because they're neighbouring schools, but obviously we're working with Abersacan to look at their budget because we look at this holistically. We're not seeing, as I think the figures in the paper really makes clear, any significant pressure overall in terms of the school's surplus or deficit position, and we're managing that actively with head teachers. You know, at the end of the day, parents have the right to express a preference for the school of their choice, and if there's a space available in the year group for that child, then our policy and the national guidance is they've got the right to express that, and there's a space they'll go in, and then we manage it. That's not really related to 21st century schools per se. That's been happening in schools since the school system has been drawn up, I think.
And just to finish with, could I just say that I put my name down, or my name forward to become a governor in a comprehensive school, but to date I haven't been taken up.
Thank you.
Okay, Jason next.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Hopefully a quick one to answer, but what impact do you think the combining of Blantyre and Fairwater schools currently has on the results that Cumbrian High School is seeing? And at what point do you think that impact will be eliminated? And secondly, I note that the executive member for education is pretty quiet this morning. I'm just wondering if we could invite you for your thoughts on the contents of the report. That's all right.
The reason I've been quiet this far is because questions have been addressed to Dermot and Debbie, and quite rightly so, because Dermot and Debbie, Dermot primarily, has indeed delivered the report in the first instance. But I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you care to ask me. So fire away. Was there a question in your delivery then? If there was, I missed it.
My question was if you could just deliver your thoughts on the contents of the report.
Sorry, I didn't
Could you deliver your thoughts on the contents of the report?
Yes. Well, the sentiments being expressed by Dermot, certainly because we talked about this in the construction of the report prior to that and subsequent to that. And it's been right throughout the whole process. We've been in constant conversation about this. So I wouldn't I, share the views that he's expressed. I don't think any of us, certainly not me, would be happy about the state of affairs in the secondary sector, but I'd qualify that by saying that there are extenuating circumstances in some respects, certainly with Flew, and I think these have been recognised by Estin when they delivered their report. I think that the other secondary schools are not doing excellently, with the exception of St Albans, but certainly other schools have been improving, and there are positive evidence-based signs of that. And I think the primary sector speaks for itself. But I repeat, we're not happy with what's happening, what has happened in the secondary sector. We have, I think, put in the kind of systems that we would expect to bring success going forward. And I think that time will tell whether or not that's the case. I would certainly echo some of the sentiments being expressed in this chamber about governors being crucial. Certainly the point expressed by one of my colleagues emphasising that the role of governors isn't for a monthly or every 6 weeks a meeting in general terms. We need good governors because there are a multiple system of subgroups and subcategories that actually drive the progress of a school more so than monthly meetings. More than that, I would only be echoing everything that's been said, not just by Dermot and Debbie, but certainly by others who picked up on the report. I am fully in support of the veracity of the report. I think it is an incredibly honest, evidence-based report. We've had to take some decisions that are reflected in this report that we would have preferred not to have taken. But it's a question of biting on the bullet and taking tough decisions, because not taking tough decisions might very well have an effect on, and certainly do have an effect and a negative impact on our learners. And I hope that everybody in this room here today would acknowledge the fact and share with me that the paramount important issue here is doing what we can to improve the situation for our learners. That's always been our emphasis, and believe it or not, it's always been my emphasis, because I have from time to time got the impression that because effectively as exec member the buck stops with me, but I think there is an undercurrent of an assumption from certain quarters that I'm not doing sufficient, or what I'm doing isn't sufficient. That isn't necessarily the case. I spend probably more hours than most, if not all people, pursuing the goals that we've set ourselves. I think, coming back to the report, because this is the question you asked, I think the report, as I've already said, is an honest appraisal of where we are. I think it's evidence-based, so if anybody wants to test it, they can. And I think that all of those who've had a contribution to constructing it would be of a single voice in that issue. And I believe, picking up on the general comments made in this forum today, I think there is, although sometimes grudging, I think there is an acknowledgement that this report points us perhaps in the right direction, with a degree of clarity for what needs to be done and what is being done for the future.
I come back on your first question, which was about the combination then of Lantarnam and Fairwater. Obviously, that was a council decision. There's always a risk when you combine two schools that can be an assault on standards, or it can be a threat to standards. What I would say is that the combination of both of those schools was very carefully planned. The budget position of both schools, obviously a threat that comes in with two schools combined is the budget position. You've got your appendices today, some of the SEC funding that went in. The school remains in a strong financial position. That wasn't a concern. The head teacher and governing body at the time chose the staff that they wanted to. So was it the combination? No doubt it made it more complicated. But we are where we are, and that was the discussion we had with the school when two schools combined. What we need to focus in on is not what the decision's been made, but what's the quality of teaching and learning in every classroom, and how are the leadership in the school going to ensure that every child gets a good lesson every day. And that's been a theme through our discussion. with the school, and it's reflected in the steps we've taken within the report. So for me, I know that some of the governors on that governing body to this day still go back to that as being the reason, and it's 4 years since it's happened. Well, I'm sorry, I just can't subscribe to that. For me, it's about what we do excuse me, every day in school to bring about improvement in standards. And I think we've tried to detail at some length now what we've done with schools consistently in those schools, and that school in particular, over time, and what we continue to do. So I don't subscribe to that. That's the reason. The reason is the quality of teaching that was happening in every classroom wasn't good enough every day, and that's the bit we remain focused on achieving in every one of our schools.
Okay, I've got Stuart Ashley next.
I just wanted to come back to the business that Veronica and Mr Kemp were talking about governors, because it's an issue that seems to come up time and time again in various forums that I was talking about, and just reiterate, some of us have been governors for more years than we'd like to admit. I looked at it, it was 1972 I was first asked to be a governor in Cardiff. So it's an issue, and it seems that people are incredibly reluctant to be governors these days. The question's asked, there's allocation on community councils and various other places, and it's a matter of service and duty. And the one trick I think we are missing with it, it's voluntary work, and maybe there's some synergy between what TVA does, 12 Voluntary Alliance, and those skill sets that are involved in that, and being a governor. I think we might have missed a trick there, but I remember years and years ago I was actually put on the governors by the late Jack Brooks in Cardiff, a certain school and a certain person that was there as well, I'm not mentioning who, and it was something I was actually quite pleased to be put on at the time. I'm not sure I would be, they serving on 2 governing bodies now, but no, you go and do it, and it's a lot more work than you think it is, and it's something you do. But the other point about it is for people that are parent. I've been a parent governor as well, strangely enough, for various other reasons. It's something you can gain a lot of experience, and a lot of people that are governors actually go on and find it as transferable skills. That's that plus about it. Now, I also think that it is not necessarily for local businessmen or the rest of it, although they are extremely valuable. People learn a hell of a lot and go on and do lots of other things, like become councillors. So it's about your skill set and what you can do. So we hear this about governors are very, very hard working and generally learn things. So I think in terms of development. The other thing, what the presiding officer mentioned as well, which I think is important, it's the construct about the school and where it sits. And one of the problems I see with secondary schools is both primaries. Primaries sit in their communities, and one of the problems I have with secondary schools is where they relate to. Now, is this a problem or not, Dim? I was going to ask you that question, because I think maybe just ask the same question. How they relate to the communities and ownership by communities, it always seems to me a problem. I just wondered whether this is, we certainly on the community council, we try to relate to all the secondary schools and with a sort of extra curriculum, but it seems the pressure of exams takes us out. I just wondered about that.
I think one of the things we'd always encourage all of our schools, because not all primary schools are as community focused as we'd like them to be, and not all secondary schools aren't as community focused as perhaps you suggested there. Again, it comes back to the ethos and the culture within the school. For me, you as council have invested many, many, many tens of millions of pounds in council buildings, schools, which they are, of course, your assets, and we should be really seeing those as community hubs. And that's something that I know that Welsh Government were particularly focused on before, and I think the current First Minister is interested in looking at that piece of work again. My answer is that it's variable. Certainly where we've gone through 21st century schools programme in Band A and now in Band B, we've been very clear with governing bodies that our expectation that it'll be community use. So again, you think about Crossy Killiog and the build that's nearing completion, looks fantastic. The resources that we've ensured are available to that school, the head teacher and governing body are looking at how they can fully engage with the community to make sure that the building is used throughout the day and into the evening, because the assets it has will really augment what we can do in terms of well-being across that part of Cwmbran. So we really want to build on those opportunities, But that very much is something, again, that we have to work in partnership with governing bodies and head teachers. But my view is that there's more we can do, and that's a discussion that we'll continue to take forward with heads and governors.
Just, I think Hannah Stewart was asking with governor training, I don't know if there are any accredited courses around, but linking in with volunteering, I know like when you have to do sort of, you know, simple OCE courses and you have a folder and all that, which can seem quite a lot, but it does mean that people are showing that they can apply the courses they've been on and that sort of thing. Maybe perhaps we should look, or the AS should look at something like that to take forward that, you know, is a little bit more involved and it gives people a confidence then, you know, even if it's just a piece of paper, it says, you know, I am fit to challenge the head teacher, etc.
I was on a scrutiny course about 6 to 7 years ago, and they had HMIs and the rest of it, and the Welsh Audit Office down there, and they were using school governing bodies and the Welsh Audit as a scrutiny. So they use that example and this stuff to actually come back at us as scrutineers. So there's scrutiny built into the system, and it struck me then that that was an important thing to use. It was, and the challenge, I mean, I've always been challenging on this when I'm a school governing body. It doesn't always make you popular, but it's what we're all about, and Rosa's nodding as well, because asking the awkward questions, whether it be curriculum, financial, or whatever, is an important thing. And I mean, you know, that's what we do in council.
Just very quickly to say that, again, we are having a discussion with the Welsh Government about what the national expectations are for governors. I'm sure, you know, it's something that, again, we look at with ES in terms of what the training offer is to governors. We just need to be mindful of, while some ideas around paid governors, about having a skills threshold to become a governor, which is a selection process that doesn't exist at the moment, for example. These are very interesting ideas, but they need to fit within the guidelines that we currently have in terms of how school governors can be selected and how they're selected. So some of the ideas that we're talking about would require a change in legislation or statutory guidance, but we will take that back as part of the discussions we're having on an ongoing basis with the Welsh Government.
Okay, I've got Rose next.
Thank you, Chair. I've been accused in the past and again today of reflecting or talking about some historic events. I'm going to do it again because for those members that weren't on the council or had that information, in 2012, I think it was 2012, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that School Challenge Cymru was brought in. It was brought in whilst Fairwater High School was still in existence, and certainly helped Fairwater High School. It went from a very low ebb up to July 2015 when it closed, and it closed when it was on a green school, very much like St Albans at the moment. Since 3 years, it's 4 years in September that the school has been open. The last 2 years we've had extra 3 LA governors placed on the governing body, and the last 12 months we've had an extra further governing, so it totals 16 LA governors on the governing body of Cwmbran High School. So that's where we are at the moment. As far as learning things, monitoring of governors' attendance, that happens in my schools anyway. I don't know whether or not it happens in every school, but certainly on my agenda that used to be, there was a monitor, and I actually reported any absences to the executive member and the head of education. So I don't know whether that's right across the board, but perhaps it's something that should be done right across the board. My question on this, and I won't go because of my declarations of interest into any further detail, my question on this one is, can we expect any of the further 3 schools on Amber to go into special measures in the near future?
That would be an issue that Eston would decide as part of their statutory visits. I think at this point it's probably worth saying I think it's next year there's going to be a hiatus in visits to schools who haven't already been inspected by Eston. Is that next year? Yeah. So the only schools who could go into Eston category of special measures would be schools who are already subject to a category, and those schools will be revisited. But that clearly will be an issue for Eston. I can't say more than that. Obviously, we're working with all of our schools in the way that we've outlined to try to make sure that schools don't go into difficulty, and where they are in difficulty, that they move out of that position. As we said about Westmoreland and Abersac, and they move out quite rapidly and recover well.
Okay. Oh, sorry, Alan Slade. You're down. Alan Slade next, and then.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank officers for a really comprehensive report. Having read the report and listened to the debate this morning, it seems to me that a key issue that everybody seems to be talking about is the need to improve leadership within the education service. So, as I've thought long and hard about this, and I would propose a motion that this council removes the executive member for education from office in accordance with paragraph 5.4.1, section E of the council's constitution.
Have you got your motion in writing?
Well, I can certainly type it out.
Okay. If we take a short break as well, because then we can use the bathroom, etc., and we'll come back in 10 minutes and we'll do it then, okay?
Yeah. No.
Yeah, do you want me to? Right. Okay, just a second. Councillor Slade has put forward an amendment. What I'm going to do, I've got two more speakers down to speak, if it's okay with you. Janet and Peter, let them ask their questions. Okay, Janet doesn't want you, just Peter then. And then we'll go back and do the amendment, if that's okay. Okay, so if we just do Peter, and then you can go through the whole thing, if that's all right.
Yeah. Sorry, Councillor Slade. Because we want to finish the debate on the questions, because you came in with an amendment, before we finished the debate. I think what the presiding member wants to do is just finish the debate on the substantive report. Then you will move your amendment, and as long as it's seconded, then we will go into the debate about the amendment.
If that's okay.
Thanks, Chair. I have numerous questions, but they've already been put forward, so thanks.
Peter then. Oh, well, we didn't need to do it anyway.
Thank you, Madam Presiding Member. I've spoken to Councillor Slade, and obviously this amendment will need to be seconded, but the amendment is as follows, that the first recommendation to the report is that the Council note the content of the report, and Councillor Slade's amendment is that there be a 2 to that recommendation, and 2 is that this Council removes the Executive Member for Education from office. So that is that's the amended recommendations. I think Dallas wants to come in first.
Yes, thank you, Presiding Member. On the basis that that recommendation obviously involves Councillor Yowell, Councillor Yowell is going to declare a personal and a prejudicial interest, and therefore is going to leave the chamber when that matter is being discussed. So if I can give advice to Councillor Yowell to leave the chamber. Thank you.
Okay, then, is there a seconder first? Yeah. Okay, then, Councillor Slade, did you want to?
Thank you, Chair. The Welsh Local Government Association framework describes the roles of members, and in particular describes the role, purpose and activities of a cabinet member. Amongst these are to provide leadership in the portfolio, to be accountable for choices and performance in the portfolio, to have an overview of the performance management, efficiency and effectiveness of the portfolio. And I would remind members that the Council's own constitution states that within their portfolio areas, the executive members have the following broad responsibilities: to provide leadership for the services and issues within their respective portfolios, and to have key accountability for respective policies and plans; to provide the public focus for democratic accountability and involvement for their respective areas. Well, I guess that's why they get the big bucks. It is clear from this report displayed before us today, however, that only one of our 6 comprehensive schools are in the green category. A third of our schools, 2 albeit 2, are in special measures, in secondary schools I'm talking about, and the remaining 50% of schools have either been under SDIN review within the past year or so, or remain so. And a lot has been said about the Board of Governors at Cumberland High School. I just want to remind Council that there are 5 Labour councillors on the board, 3 of which are executive members. There are also 2 ex-Labour councillors and at least 1 Labour community councillor. Now, despite this, there is a report coming to the Executive Member for Education where the Chief Education Officer considers it unlikely that that governing board are able to bring about the necessary improvement required. And it's been recommended that the local authority remove the entire Board of Governors. I mean, just think about this for a minute. If the situation at Cumberland High isn't sorted out soon, and let's be fair, the signs are not very good, there is every chance that some children that attend there will have undertaken their entire secondary education in a school in special measures. I mean, shame on all of us, I say. Now, one might imagine that Cumberland High is a one-off, but I'm not so sure. I mean, the executive member's own comments in response to the news that YYG was entering special measures were, and I quote, "The decline in attainment at Key Stage 4 since 2014 was a key factor." Now, just let that sink in for a minute. Since 2014. Now, this means that someone must have known that the school's performance has been declining for what, some 5 years, but that decline clearly hasn't been addressed. I do not believe that we need to engage in a blame game, and that's not the point. But what is clear from the WLGA framework and the Council's own constitution is that the Executive Member for Education is accountable and bears responsibility for the performance of his portfolio. And it is equally clear that the secondary education element of that portfolio has performed extremely poorly. Now, the leader has previously been asked to dismiss the executive member because of declining performance and been unrefused. And the executive member himself has also refused to resign when prompted. So it can only remain for the Council to make that decision. And before we go to a vote or anything, I would just like to add that I implore our Labour colleagues to vote on the merits of the issue at hand and according to their conscience. All the evidence points to the fact that our secondary schools are failing our children. And this issue is too important to put party loyalty before the rights of children and grandchildren to the best education that we can provide for them. Thank you.
Leader, next.
I'd like to speak in opposition to the amendment, and in doing so, I can assure members that if I thought that the change of the executive member in charge of education was the key to improving things, which is after all what we're here to do, improve things, not fire shots at each other, then I would not hesitate to do so. I believe, on the contrary, that Councillor Yell has a great dedication to education. He's formed a good relationship with the officers in the area and with the majority of schools in a way that wasn't the case half a dozen years ago or so when I came into this council. And so I believe that he is the right person to do that job. So it won't be out of party loyalty or anything else that I will be opposing this amendment. It will be because I don't think, having listened to all the evidence that we've gone through today, singling this down to a single individual to take a pop at is a sensible course of action. Instead, I would implore members to focus on this issue 12 months a year, not just on one day, and do whatever we can to work together, putting aside personalities, to help improve our schools. And so I would oppose the motion and move that we go to a vote.
Have we got a seconder for the movement to go to a vote? Yeah? Okay. Yeah, that's fine. Just to be clear, we're voting for the amendment or against the amendment?
Sorry, I've been asked to clarify again what the amendment is. So the amendment is that the amendment to the report is changed so that so recommendation 1 is that the council note the content of the report, and recommendation 2, which is added, is that this council removes the executive member for education from office. So that is the amendment on which members are being asked to vote. Well, move to the back. Is it point of order?
Is it point of order? Or?
Are we voting on the amendments that
Members will vote on the amendment. If the amendment succeeds, then it becomes a substantive motion, so you then vote on the substantive motion. If the amendment falls, we go back to the original recommendation, which is to note the report. Okay.
Councillor Stuart Ashley.
Against.
Councillor Hugh Bevan.
For.
Councillor Ronald Burnett. He's left. Councillor Glyn Carron.
Against.
Councillor Richard Clark.
Against.
Councillor Leonard Constance.
Point of order. Could people put their mics on, please, because it's not being captured on webcast.
Councillor Veronica Crick.
Against.
Councillor Fiona Cross.
Against.
Councillor David Daniels.
Against.
Councillor Stephen Evans.
Against.
Councillor Stuart Evans.
For.
Councillor Joanne Gordon.
Against.
Councillor Elizabeth Haynes.
For.
Councillor John Haller.
Against.
Councillor Anthony Hunt.
Against.
I'm sorry, I can't do it quick enough for the webcast, turning it on and off, so I'll just keep mine on. Is that okay? Yeah? Is that okay?
No, the others will go on. The others will go on. You have to turn it off.
Turn it on and off. Right, okay. Councillor Gaynor James.
Against.
Councillor Gwyn Jenkins.
For.
Councillor Mike Jeremiah.
For.
Councillor Alan Jones.
Against.
Councillor Faye Jones.
Against.
Councillor Janet Jones. Councillor Nicholas Jones.
For.
Councillor Peter Jones.
Against.
Councillor Robert Kemp.
For.
Councillor Sue Malson. Councillor Jason O'Connell.
For.
Councillor Mandy Owen.
Against.
Councillor Norma Parish.
Against.
Councillor Jessica Powell.
Against.
Councillor Kelly Preston.
Against.
Councillor Emma Rapier.
Against.
Councillor Rose Seaborn. Councillor Louise Shepherd. Councillor Alan Slade.
For.
Councillor Christopher Tew.
For.
Councillor Colette Thomas. Councillor Dave Thomas.
For.
Councillor Neil Waite.
Against.
Councillor Raymond Williams.
Okay, the results were 13 to 21, so the amendment has fallen. So we're returning now to the substantive motion, which is the original one, which was to note the report. So does anybody want to continue speaking, or does somebody want to move that we go to a vote on that one? Yeah? Okay. So can I have a show of hands then? All those in favour of noting the report? Thank you. Anybody against? Any abstentions? Right, thank you, members. That concludes that one. So we've noted the report. The only other item is date of the next meeting, which will be next Tuesday. So I'll see you again then. Right, call the meeting closed.